Welcome, everyone. We are going to begin. Thank you for logging in. I introduce Beth Searle, President and CEO of the Jewish Community Foundation, to start our program. Beth. Beth, you're on mute.
Now I'm not on mute, I hope. Sorry about that. That is some things are not going to change no matter how long this Zoom era goes on. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I am really thrilled to welcome you, not just to JCF's Access to Insight, but to the very first donor education event that we are partnering with the San Diego Foundation for. And I know Mark will say the same. We hope that this is the first of many to come. Both the Jewish Community Foundation and the San Diego Foundation, we're jointly committed to building the best San Diego for the most number of people that we possibly can. And in this particular case, having an engaged and educated citizenry around an election is really important. And we're delighted to have Scott Lewis and the Voice of San Diego with us to help us understand some of the local propositions and issues. And I think with that, I'm going to introduce my friend and colleague, Mark Stewart.
Well, thanks so much. Hello and good afternoon. I'm Mark Stewart, and I have the honor and privilege of leading the San Diego Foundation. I've served in this role for almost 16 months, and I'm so grateful to have this opportunity to make a difference for a region that I have come to love. One of my greatest joys in this work is the opportunity to collaborate with Beth Searle, the CEO of the Jewish Community Foundation of San Diego County. Beth is wise and talented in so many ways, and I learn from her great experience whenever we're together in person or, like today, virtually. Many weeks ago, Beth called me and asked if the San Diego Foundation would like to collaborate on an educational event for our fund holders, friends, and nonprofit partners. Beth explained that this event would be focused on a discussion and explanation of the many California propositions and tax measures appearing on November's ballot. As you can imagine, it took me about a millisecond for me to respond with an enthusiastic yes. I'm very excited for this program and hope it will be the first of many educational opportunities that our two community foundations will sponsor together for the benefit of our collective audiences. Both organizations wish to inspire enduring philanthropy. Both wish to be change makers for our region. Both recognize that our fund holders choose to invest with us rather than Fidelity, Schwab, Vanguard, and the other national organizations, because these folks want to make a difference locally. And more importantly, they want to learn about how that difference can be best made. And finally, I know in all the times that I've had a chance to work alongside Beth Searle, that her team, that with both of our organizations believe that together always equals better. So let's get started. The star of this webinar is, of course, the Voice of San Diego and its incredible leader, Scott Lewis. Scott Lewis is the editor-in-chief and CEO of the Voice of San Diego. He oversees all operations and has created partnerships and products that have earned this pioneering nonprofit news organization both national and international recognition. So Scott, we're all excited to be with you today, and thank you for all that you do.
Thank you, Mark and Beth, and the Jewish Community Foundation and the San Diego Foundation. I am truly honored to be doing this. I feel a little weird doing it from my garage, speaking to all of you, but what a tremendous honor this is. And I will say from the beginning, I'm not going to be able to go through all of the ballot measures because there are so many, but I think we can establish a basic knowledge about some of the biggest issues we're going to be facing and discussing here in San Diego over the next couple of months. So let's go ahead and get started. I don't have a lot of time. I want to get to all of your questions. Let's get right into it. I'm going to share my screen here. And yeah, let's go. So Voice of San Diego is a nonprofit news organization. We're funded by more than 3,400 donors who make this possible to do investigative and explanatory work and teach me everything that I have come to know about all these issues. So first up, let's go through just how voting will work. This is an unprecedented year, obviously, for so many reasons. I spoke with the Registrar of Voters for the County of San Diego recently, and he gave me kind of a rundown about how it will work. Obviously, in the past, we had polling stations like this one, 1,600 polling stations normally. This year, there will be only 235. Normal elections, we have about 76% of San Diego voters who have already opted in for mail balloting. Many of you probably experienced this. You get the ballot in 5 or 6 weeks before the election. You spend some time with it. Maybe it sits, maybe gets a couple coffee stains. Then you finally get after it. That is going to happen for them just like normal. It's just that the other 24% are also going to receive their ballots in the mail as well. So my wife was already a mail-in ballot recipient, and I always went to the polling station as a sentimental guy, as nostalgia for me. This year, both of us will receive our ballots in the mail. There will be 235 places where we can drop those off. Those are going to be sort of super vote centers as opposed to the 1,600 polling stations that were normally out. But those will operate for 4 days before the election. So you can drop it off anytime within that period. Also, if you mail it in, with everything that's going on with the mail, or at least concerns about the mail, California decided that they would give 17 days after the election to allow ballots to come in. So if you mailed it the day before the election and for whatever reason it got gummed up, it has 17 days to get to the registrar to count. This year, the Registrar of Voters also announced a special app service you can sign up for that will notify you on your phone if and when the ballot arrives and is counted by the registrar. So one way to you used to have to just look it up proactively or call in. Now you can get notified when that comes in. I call this in part the property tax election. And there are a lot of property tax discussions to be had. First of all, though, let's understand valuation. Valuation for your property, if you own property in San Diego, is what the assessor has assessed the value of your home or your property at. It does not mean that's what the property is worth. That's really important. It just means what the assessed value is. Excuse me. So that's really important to understand for a lot of these measures that we are going to see. For instance, in the Dehesa, the Cajon Valley, the Oceanside, and La Mesa Spring Valley school districts, there will be property tax measures on the ballot to increase property taxes for schools and school districts in those areas. Those are often done as a measurement of per $100,000 in property. So it might be something like $7 or $20 or $60 per $100,000 worth of property. If it's $60 per $100,000, you have a $500,000 valued home, that's a $300 increase to your property taxes. So when you read the ballot measures, look at that number, and then you can multiply it by how much of the multiplier you have of your property. Now, there are two big things for San Diego residents to think about with their property taxes on this ballot this year. One of them, of course, is State Proposition 15. This is going to be a huge one. You're going to hear a lot about it in coming weeks. 15 is the one that would decouple the property taxes for commercial properties from the system that has restrained property taxes since 1978 and Proposition 13. So Proposition 13 basically said, this is your valuation for your home. It will only go up 1% for every year for the rest of your life if it goes up at all, and it can't go up higher. So no matter what your property actually becomes worth, it won't jump that high. What Proposition 15 would do is say that's fine for property that you have that's your home, and for property that you own under $3 million. But for anything above that, that property will suddenly be valued at the market value as assessed by the assessors, and thus will be a rather substantial property tax increase for those properties. That money would go to fund a lot of things the state talks about, schools, all the different backfills that they want to do for income taxes that are also changing. Also on Measure A, we wanted to talk about Measure A. So just a quick background. propositions are for state ballot measures, and measures are for local. So if you ever hear the difference between propositions and measures, well, that's what it is. It's just defining, and so people can make a distinction between state and local ballot initiatives. States are propositions and the measures are local. Measure A is the one in the city of San Diego that is meant to increase property taxes for affordable housing. So it would basically allow the city of San Diego to borrow up to $900 million. And it would pay it back by increasing property taxes within the city of San Diego from $3 to up to $21 over the next 4 decades. Now, that doesn't mean they'll jump right away, $21 per $100,000. It will probably start much lower, maybe at 11, maybe 7. They're going to figure that out. But this authorizes them to raise property taxes up to that $21 per $100,000 of assessed value. So if you have a $500,000 home, again, this authorizes the city of San Diego to begin tax increases that could get up to about $100 tax increase for your property. That's Measure A. The money would come in and they would borrow against it, and they would be able to issue these bonds. Now, these bonds themselves would not build affordable housing. They would be combined with sources from the state, from other sources in the city, and from federal monies to produce thousands of homes they think they could build. So the Housing Federation is a big supporter of this. I just heard they're trying to raise $1 million to support the campaign. I talked to Tom Shepard, who's helping run the campaign. He's a political consultant. He says he doesn't think $1 million is enough. They will need more to get this over because this is a 2/3 requirement vote. This is Measure A. It will require 2/3 of voters to pass, which is very hard because you cannot have any organized opposition to that, as we saw with the hotel tax in March. Came just short, and some folks against it spent up to $400,000. We've already heard there's some conservatives, Carl DeMaio, who has announced his intention to spend money against it. It could be a very interesting race. Let's talk about Measure B now. Measure B will be on the ballot in the city of San Diego. This would replace the Community Review Board on Police Practices with a new oversight commission for the city of San Diego. And there's one big important part of this. The Oversight Commission, which would be led by citizens themselves into police practices, would have subpoena power. This would allow them to subpoena documents and to subpoena individual officers and investigators to ask them why they did what they did or what they did when they did it. This is an incredible addition to their power and would have, I think, pretty interesting consequences. They may never actually use the subpoena power, but just having it gives them a lot more power to oversee what police officers are doing. They would also have their own independent legal counsel. So they would no longer be subject to the legal counsel assigned to them by the city attorney. So in other words, it would significantly beef up oversight of the police department in the city of San Diego. That is Measure B. Let's talk about Measure C. So Measure C, this is the school board. This is Richard Barrera. He's running for re-election on the school board of the city of San Diego's San Diego Unified School District. San Diego Unified, of course, does not cover the entire city of San Diego, but it does cover most of the city of San Diego. John Lee Evans is not running for re-election. There's 2 opponents trying to replace him on the school board. Measure C would change how those school board elections work. Let me flip to this map for a second. These are the 5 school sort of sub-districts within the San Diego Unified School District itself. These sub-districts, right now, the way things work, if you run for school board in, say, District E, you have to advance in the primary with another runoff candidate. And then after you run in this district and make it through that primary, you get to run for the runoff across the entire district. That's a very, very difficult thing to do. You have to have a lot of resources to be able to run in a campaign across what is essentially the entire school district. The entire city, really. Not quite, with a couple of areas, San Isidro and some of the northern areas that are in different school districts. But this is a very expensive effort. And it has really, there's been calls for many years to make reforms and changes to that. They wanted to make it easier for people to represent their areas. Right now, then Measure C on the ballot for the city of San Diego would ask voters who are within that San Diego Unified School District boundary to change the charter so that voters in individual sub-districts nominate and elect their representative in both the primary and the general elections. In other words, if you're in District C, Sub-District C, you run the primary within Sub-District C, and you run the runoff within Sub-District C. The arguments for it are that it'll make it easier for people to run in those elections, and it'll make it not as easy for larger public interests to have significant influence over who gets to be on the school board. So in the past, obviously, teachers unions and school reform advocates have really dominated these elections. School teachers unions in particular have had a lot of influence, and this would make it easier for candidates to make their case to a smaller group of people and maybe have a shot. It also is more consistent with other reforms happening across the state and the county that is district-only elections as opposed to these at-large seats. Almost every city in California has switched over to those district elections. That is Measure C, and that is going to be a really interesting one to watch in the next couple of months. Let's move on to my sort of stretched out map here of the Midway Pacific Highway area. So we all know this area pretty well. This is the area of San Diego, the Targets over there, sports arenas over there, all the way down towards the Spey-War area, all these areas. These are all different community planning districts within the city of San Diego. So Peninsula, Ocean Beach, Old Town. This area the community plan was recently updated to allow for a lot more housing. But Measure E is going on the ballot this year that would allow people to be exempted from the 30-foot height limit. Remember, more than 40 years ago, City of San Diego voters decided that anything west of I-5 had to be under a 30-foot height limit. You couldn't build hotels or apartment buildings higher than that. The buildings you do see, like the Catamaran or some of those other ones, they were built before that I think it was 75 or so, 78 or so school, or that citizens ballot initiative. There was a change made in the late 90s with SeaWorld. SeaWorld successfully won a ballot measure to be allowed to produce roller coasters, which we're now seeing still being erected on that property because of the amendment that they got to that by voters. And that's what's going forward now. For this area, it's called Measure E, the Midway Height Limit. Measure E would say that this entire area, not just the sports arena, this entire area would be excluded from that 30-foot height limit on buildings within the coastal zone. They would still have to follow other zoning and city laws, but that would have a major impact on what can be built there and the number of developers and other people who would want to be part of making that possible. As you may have heard, there is a group going forward that wants to redo that entire sports arena area. That area, of course, is owned almost entirely by the city of San Diego. All those, the Phil's Barbecue, Dixieland Lumber, all those places are leased from, the land is leased from the city of San Diego. And the city of San Diego deliberately allowed those leases to start to expire so that they could put forward a massive redevelopment plan for this area. The city of San Diego's staff, led by Mayor Kevin Faulkner, chose a developer, Brookfield, to take on that challenge and to produce a plan that they would try to get through the city council that would vastly reimagine that entire area around the sports arena. This exemption, this proposition, or this measure would be for the entire community plan area, though, not just the sports arena. And it would make it a lot easier for them to rebuild the sports arena or build apartments and multifamily housing around there. If you wanted to build a new sports arena that was the same height on that land right now, you would not be allowed to because of the coastal height limit. That building was grandfathered in along with, well, it was one of those grandfathered in after that ballot measure. I believe it was Proposition D way back when. All right. I didn't want to talk too much about actual candidate elections, but I do want to talk about this one. It will have extraordinary consequences either way, depending on how it goes. This is District 3 of the County Board of Supervisors. Kristen Gaspar on the right is the incumbent. She's a Republican. She beat a Democrat that had the seat 4 years ago and is now running for re-election. She ran for Congress, you might remember, a couple years ago. And she is facing Democrat Tara Lawson-Remer. She's done a lot of professor work. She is used to work for the Obama administration, and she has a very progressive platform. And there is a lot riding on this race. The County Board of Supervisors will have, they have 5 supervisors that oversee county government. Those 5 supervisors have long been Republicans. Of course, Nathan Fletcher 2 years ago won the seat, became the first, well, not the first, but a Democrat, a pretty influential Democrat on the Board of Supervisors. The Southern South Bay County Supervisorial seat, there's 2 candidates running in that, Ben Weso and Nora Vargas, both of whom are Democrats, so that would be a second Democrat on that seat. And then depending on how this race goes, there will either be 3 Republicans or 3 Democrats. Nathan Fletcher will either be the county supervisor's chairman, or he will be in the minority of a much more conservative county board of supervisors. Because if in the East County, there are 2 candidates, Steve Voss, the mayor of Poway, a Republican, and Joel Anderson, the former state senator, also a Republican. Those 2, I think, are pretty arguably more conservative than Diane Jacob, who's exiting her seat. And so we have a really interesting situation where if Kristen Gaspar retains her seat, then we will have probably a more conservative board of supervisors than we've had in a long time. But if Tara Lawson-Remer wins, we will have a much more liberal county board of supervisors oversight of the county staff than we've ever had, probably. I think that's pretty safe to say. Both of them have vastly different dreams and ideas about how to spend the county's vast reserves, how to deal with public health, how to deal with labor unions, how to deal with development, climate change, immigration support services, welfare benefits, homelessness. It's incredible how many different things they how differently they approach it. And so one of them, for example, is about Sandag. This is Hassan Akrada. Hassan Akrada is the current executive director of the San Diego Association of Governments. The San Diego Association of Governments oversees this half-cent sales tax that is used to build roads and transit all across the region. And he has just laid out a massive $150 billion plan for how he would make it possible for you to get around San Diego using just transit, almost as easy, he says, as you can using your own automobile right now. It's an incredible, almost unfathomable investment in transit in San Diego. And that plan is something that Tara Lawson-Remer supports, and Kristen Gaspar has a lot of criticisms about. She would prefer that they make good on promises for highway improvements that were made back in 2004 when that tax increase was made effective. And so why does that matter? Well, the county controls 2 seats on the San Diego Association of Governments Board of Directors. And if Democrats take over the county Board of Supervisors, they will put 2 people who probably support more of Hassan Akrada's vision for that transit. And if Republicans retain control of the County Board of Supervisors, they'll put 2 people who probably have significant hostility to that vision. That could have incredible consequences for his plan. In fact, he was so worried about those consequences, he did something we've never actually seen. He donated to Tara Lawson-Remer. It was not something we're used to executives of government agencies doing, but he made it clear that he prefers Tara Lawson Remer winning that race. The consequences, again, of this race are just, I can't exaggerate just how big consequences they would have on public affairs of the region. And that's just one angle that could go forward. Remember, the San Diego Association of Governments has a weighted vote system right now. So the city of San Diego has most of the power on that board. So that's another example of if Barbara Bree wins that seat versus Todd Gloria, the mayor's office, that city of San Diego vote is going to change very significantly. Barbara Bree is very critical of Hassan Akrada's vision for the transit, and Todd Gloria is very supportive of it. So depending on how these races go could have significant impact on transit going forward. All of this, of course, matters because San Diego is at a moment of true crises. There's a crisis of trust in public institutions, like with the police. There's a crisis of public health, and there's an economic catastrophe none of us have ever lived through. The unemployment rate, the devastation of local businesses, and an area that I just want to end with, schools. I know that I'm speaking to a lot of powerful and influential people, and I just want to remind us where we're at. This is Edison Elementary in the city of San Diego. Edison Elementary has a wonderful story of a school that turned itself around, has increased performance of its students, has done some great work. And this was a picture taken last year there as we highlighted what they did and how they started holding themselves more accountable, how they started performing better, and this is the community they've built around the school and how impressive it is. And I think it's all important for us to remember that has been eviscerated right now. Students are not in images like this, and we don't know when they'll ever get back. There is so much at stake with this election. There's so much going forward and crises that we have to address. And it's through this election that we are going to be able to have a say in what happens. We're going to be able to pick our future. And I just want to remember what that future entails. It's people like this, it's kids like this, whose future is truly in doubt right now, is truly it has truly been derailed. And we need to keep that in mind and priority in mind as we go forward. Voice of San Diego pledges to be with you this entire way to help you follow these ballot measures, help explain and to dig into some of these election issues. We have an event coming up at the end of September through September or October 3rd. All these debates. We have a Amar Campa-Najjar versus Darrell Issa debate. We have a debate between the mayoral candidates, Todd Gloria, Barbara Bree. We have the debate between the mayoral candidates and Encinitas, Julie Thunder and Catherine Blakespeare. We have all kinds of debates about some of these initiatives we've talked about, along with forums about COVID and about schools, about the school board, as city council, so many things, and I hope you consider checking that out. I wanted to take some time to get your questions. I know I raced through a lot of different measures and such, and I look forward to going back and forth with you.
Okay, thank you so much, Scott. You're right. You did race through a bit, so there are some questions of clarification that that are coming up, and more. So I'll just remind everybody, I'm taking questions from the Q&A box. So please keep adding them. I'm going to start back with the questions that came in around Measure A and try and follow your presentation. And there was some confusion, it appears, between Measure A and what it would cover versus what the hotel tax would have covered. And so I'm wondering if you could sort of, explain the spending areas covered by Measure A versus what the hotel tax would have covered, and how are they similar and different, and things like that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So you were talking about the hotel tax increase that was on the ballot in March 3rd. Now that actually isn't dead. There is a legal argument that could make its way through with a just simple majority vote. It got just less than the 2/3 it needed. And so it's important to remember that could still actually be argued and successfully gotten through the courts. So we're still waiting to see how that is resolved. Obviously, the pandemic distracted us a little bit. That measure would have increased hotel room taxes, so just the taxes people pay when they stay in hotel rooms. And that money would have been divided up into money for the convention center expansion mostly, and then homeless services. Now, the thing with that is that there wasn't any definition about what those services would be. Some of it could have been packaged for actual housing units. Some of it could go to, say, Father Joe's or some of these other service providers that exist right now. City leaders touted that ambiguity as an advantage. They could do whatever they needed to do with the money, but it also carried with it a sort of stigma that, we don't know what they're going to do with it. And so that's a lot different than this measure, which is specifically a 2/3 measure, and it will specifically only go into the construction of affordable housing units for the lowest income individuals in our community. And those units would be restricted to only sort of rent controlled, if you will, to only be inhabited by people who qualify for them indefinitely. So it's a bit different that way. Also, the other difference is it's a property tax increase as opposed to a hotel room tax increase, which means the residents pay it as opposed to visitors.
Cool. Now that definitely clarified things. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a listener who would like to know if you see to give a little further explanation on Proposition 15. I know I wasn't sure if I heard residential properties or commercial properties or both. So I would like some information. No, my bad.
No, I raced through that part.
And I'm going to ask you this question, but I want to remind everybody that we are in the land of nonpartisan, no politics here. We're in explanation. But to what extent is Proposition 15 the beginning of the repeal of Proposition 13?
Well, that's a really good question. So Proposition 13 covered all property taxes. Proposition 15 changes that for only commercial property and only property above $3 million. So it's pretty directly attacking big shopping malls, that sort of thing. And so it would have significant impact on the people who pay rents in those kind of places. It would have impacts on obviously the people who own those places, and it would generate, they say, between $7 and $15 billion for the state every year, a tremendous amount of money. And so I think that I don't know that you can project out that they'll take on residential properties next. I think that they believe and probably rather savvily believe that attacking residential property tax caps would have a significant backlash, and they thought it would be a lot easier to go after commercial properties. And so I think they probably would draw the line there. But in 10 years, you could probably call me and make me eat crow about a statement like that. I think that the politics and polling about residential property tax increases is really harsh, especially for indefinite uses. Now, it's one thing when they're raising them for school construction bonds and stuff like that, which voters have tended to favor, but it's a little bit different for indefinite government support.
This Proposition 15, the money raised from that, there's no requirement, that is for the general fund of the state.
Yeah, I mean, it talks quite in depth, or it lists, all of the places that it would be used. And obviously they say schools, if anything is left, so they're going to it's kind of complicated. They're going to backfill some of the income tax shortfalls that they've identified. And then after that, the majority of the money goes to schools. Teachers unions are very big supporters of the measure. So I think schools do believe they would get a lot out of it. But it is not, it's not set in stone exactly how that money would be spent.
So we have a listener, a little bit, a question not quite on a specific proposition, but interested in your insights on ranked choice voting.
There was a measure that was, they tried to get on the ballot for the city of San Diego that would have had like a kind of ranked choice light. So it would have allowed 4 people to advance out of a primary for the city of San Diego. So like mayor, 4 mayoral candidates would advance out of a primary to the runoff. And then you would rank those 4. It was kind of like a half measure based on like a lot of people that wanted pure ranked choice, because what's the point of a primary with ranked choice? That's the whole point, is to get rid of ranked primary and just allow people to vote on their first and second choices right away, and let the computers hash that out. So I think there's a lot of promise in ranked choice for lesser funded candidates, lesser, third party type candidates, because they can, people can go with their passions for those candidates. They can say like, oh, I really like that, rather than making the calculation that they, that they're wasting their vote on a third party candidate or something like that. So I think if you support more alternative or different views on things aside from the two parties, I think ranked choice is obviously quite attractive. I think obviously the parties in many cases don't support it, although Republicans challenged Democrats to do it here. And Mark Kersey, a former Republican, was a very big supporter of the ranked choice here. So I think it's a pretty attractive system in some ways, but it can be controversial.
Want to give a quick explanation of how it works? I'm not sure everybody understands exactly how it works.
Yeah, so basically you would have like 8 candidates on a ballot, and you would mark your first, second, and third choices, and then a computer would go through and make sure that the sort of best choice of everybody made it through, so there wouldn't have to be a runoff. So if your first choice didn't get through, then it would go to your second, and if your second was everybody else's second, that person would probably prevail. It's actually a little bit of a complicated algorithm, but it works out a lot of places around the country, Maine, San Francisco, but then across the world also use it.
Thank you. I actually have voted in ranked choice. Before I came to San Diego, I lived in Oakland, and we had voting for mayor. And what does end up happening is that the person who gets elected is not the majority, doesn't have number 1 from the majority of people. So it's like, that's the upside and the downside. So someone commented relative to Measure E that that please note there is no height limit mentioned in Measure E. And then someone else wanted to know, what does the Midway Planning Board want to raise the height limit to? So we need a little clarification on E.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't believe they set an alternative height limit. It's just lifted. And so it would be exempt for that area. You could build higher. I don't believe that they replace it with another one above 30. It's just lifted. Does that make sense? Is that what the question's about?
I think so. I think so.
There's a lot of hope in the political world that the developer who was chosen to get that redevelopment bid, so they didn't get the bid, they got the right to submit a bid to the city council, that the city council can approve or not. And the 2 mayoral candidates are pretty iffy on whether they would even stick with that plan. But there was a lot of hope that firm and the people who would benefit from that development would support and invest in the campaign to raise the height limit or to exempt that. And I think we're all waiting to see if that actually happens or not.
So a whole bunch of more Proposition 15 questions have popped up. So we'll just stick to that for the moment. So is an apartment building considered a commercial building or a residential building?
Yeah, that's I believe considered commercial.
So
it's only your private residence.
So in effect, then it could affect the rents charged on apartments.
Yes.
And someone says it seems like it would that Proposition 15 would require its own incremental bureaucracy in order to keep marking commercial valuations to market. So what's the assessing?
That's a good question. At PolitiFest, we're going to have an event with the assessor who will talk about how challenging that might be. So I would encourage you to come to that. If you go to politifest.org, you can sign up. I'm very interested in how that would work out. Okay, we have a clarification from somebody who says Prop 15 does not affect apartments. Let me double check on that. I apologize if I've messed that up.
Wait, just so we're clear, everyone, we'll get a clarification on Prop 15, and when we send out our email to everyone who attended today, Scott will get the clarification about Proposition 15 and apartment buildings, so
I
that
apologize for that.
you can't be expected to know everything,
Well,
you know.
but that's my brand though, Beth. So,
Not off the top of your head, you can't know everything in detail, so we will get that.
yeah, I'm sorry. What was the question we were just grappling with?
About the marking the market and the assessors.
Oh yeah, I think that's it's a valid question. You know, I think it's important to know that this is the way it's done in many other parts of the country. You know, a lot of places that don't have income taxes famously actually have you know, significant property taxes, and so they've been, you know, operating on this sort of system for some time. And so I think that's often, you know, here in California we capped property taxes, but we did significant income taxes. Property taxes, you know, this would sort of put us in the rare air of having significant property taxes and significant income taxes. So I think there are other places that have modeled this in the past. I don't think it's impossible, but it would make the assessor's job more interesting, and there would be a lot more challenges to his or her valuations for sure.
Someone is asking for an overview of Proposition 22, which was not on your list today, but if you're familiar with it, could you tell us a little bit about Proposition?
Yeah, boy, Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, they've both, all of them plus have put in tons of money into that campaign over just the last couple of days. It is going to be maybe one of the most expensive ballot measure campaigns in California's recent history. So basically right now there's sort of this big debate. There are employees, like we have 17 employees at Voice of San Diego. We also have freelancers. So freelancers, we're allowed under the new ruling and new law to have freelancers. The new ruling came out and said that if any of the freelancers actually do the work of our business for us, they have to be actual employees, which made us very confused and worried for a while, because those freelancers often are people just starting off, or photographers that don't want to work with us full time, whatever. And so over time, they added a ton of exemptions to this law. It was AB 5, obviously. So we along with a lot of other places, were exempted and allowed to continue basically operating as normal. If we're telling somebody what to do every day, they should be employees. Well, Uber, Lyft, all those places, they don't want to hire as employees all of the thousands and thousands of drivers that they have. This is really interesting. They claim that they are just an app connecting drivers to riders, and thus those drivers are independent individuals. But what they've recognized is that those drivers may need some benefits of a certain level. I can't identify exactly what benefits they've set aside, but some level of protection for workers' comp and other things. What they absolutely don't want to do is pay them a minimum wage. And so what this Proposition 22 does is create a third category of employee. Basically, I can read it here. It establishes different criteria for determining whether app-based transportation and delivery drivers are employees or independent contractors. So the companies would be required to provide alternative benefits, a minimum compensation, but not the minimum wage, healthcare subsidies, insurance, safety training, and sexual harassment policies. So it would be like a third, basically they'd be creating a new category of worker, app-based worker. It would also make them, I think, importantly, make it harder for them to unionize. So it has a few little dings like that. So put simply, it creates a third category of worker that's not a worker, not an independent contractor. It has some benefits, but not the normal ones.
Just a clarification, someone just wanted, I know you mentioned this, but the deadline for mail-in ballots, they have to be postmarked by November 3rd?
Yes. So if you get it in the mail postmarked by Election Day, it will be counted as long as it gets there within 17 days after the election.
Right,
So that's different. They usually only do 4 days.
But generally, it's a good idea when you get your ballot, once you know how you're going to vote, to fill out your ballot and send it back. There's no,
yes, send it back. Go to sdvote.com and you can sign up for the service to let you know that it's been received and it's marked. You know, that's the big thing. They do go through every ballot. They check the signatures to compare it to your registration and previous ballots. There's a lot going on there, and that's why it takes so long for it to get counted.
Oh, this is a really interesting question, and have at it if you can. A little bit different. If there was such a thing as a league of nonprofit voters, what would they say about this upcoming election? Which measures, propositions would most impact nonprofits and the general philanthropic landscape in San Diego? And I can assure you this was not a question that Mark Stewart or I asked.
Well, that's a really interesting question. Obviously, if they own property, that would be a pretty significant, although nonprofits, they'd be exempt there. I think specifically it would, a lot of nonprofits are obviously very interested in that housing measure A. There is kind of a powerful theory that continues strong, that the best thing you can do for homeless individuals is get them in at home. That's the stability they need, and then you can provide services. Now there's alternative theories, including the president and others, who believe that you need to get them services before you're home, and then there's people like the mayor who are kind of in between. But if you're a nonprofit who believes that housing is a supply of housing in particular is what's needed, then that's probably a major one for you to consider, especially if you think the government has a major role in that. If you don't, then impose that. I think the education area, obviously, a lot of us care deeply about that. The school board elections, plus the reform to how the school board elections work, will have significant consequences on the type of people who get into those roles. So that's something to really educate yourself about. And I think there's a lot of criminal justice advocates very interested in some of the police measures, the Police Oversight Commission in particular. And then the biggest one, I think the county itself right now is handing out $20-30 million in childcare support and grants. I think San Diego Foundation or others might be involved in that. And that's the kind of thing that would happen probably a lot more if different people are elected to the county board of supervisors. And so, that's the kind of thing that it's kind of unheard of for the county to be doing that level of childcare granting, that sort of thing.
So at the risk again of becoming too political, a couple people have asked for you to just comment more on the mayoral race. And so maybe just a little bit about how you see the differences between the two candidates.
Well, it's very interesting. So Barbara Bry, Todd Gloria was doing really well, getting a lot of different endorsements. He basically solidified the union network of support. He got almost every possible endorsement on the left. He got the Democratic Party in particular. Barbara Bry has been running a campaign, I think, really trying to appeal to people who are worried about their neighborhoods, about construction in their neighborhoods, about development in their neighborhoods, about vacation rentals in their neighborhoods, about things like that. They're coming for our neighborhoods. They're worried about, she's taken on a pretty hostile approach to the transit plans that have gone forward. So I wouldn't say she's gone to the right or Republican as much, but she's definitely staking out a more right side of things kind of approach. And it'll be really interesting to see how far that goes. Obviously, San Diego has far more Democratic registered voters than Republican, but there's still a lot. And so, I think they both recognize the power of that. Now we're also watching the scandal downtown, 101 Ash Street. Barbara Bry is intensely hammering on that as something that Todd Gloria should not have allowed the city to get into when he was on the city council. He retorts that, she shouldn't have approved the remodel that caused all the asbestos to come out. I think she's trying to hang on him a thing that you can't trust him to handle these big, complex business deals. And he's had a little bit of trouble sort of responding. And I think that'll be really interesting to watch going forward. Barbara Bry, though, just about one last point about housing. The business industry or the Building Industry Association endorsed both candidates. So indicating that, despite the rhetoric, there's support from both of them for the kind of building that the Building Industry Association wants to see. And so I think it's going to be really tight and really interesting to watch. Everything, Todd Gloria was raising more money, getting more endorsements for a long time. But then, Barbara Bry raised like almost 3 times as much as him in this last reporting cycle. But now the big independent funds are starting to get, we saw Tom Sudbury donate to the Independent Expenditure Campaign. He's a developer. for Barbara Bree. I think he remains very grateful to her for her support of the SDSU plan at Mission Valley. And so there will be a fund that attacks Barbara Bree from Todd Gloria's perspective as well. So it's going to be, you're going to start to see some commercials in the next few days.
So we're running out of time here. So
I'll go all day, but yes, no problem.
so I've one more question and then
Sure.
question. There was a question back on Measure B about the subpoena power and the new commission. It would have its own legal representation, you said, and so what are the financial ramifications, I guess, is what's being asked, is who's paying for that? It would seem that the commission being proposed, it would be more expensive to run with its having separate legal power, legal counsel.
Well,
the mechanism.
The city attorney currently hires outside counsel to do the work of the existing commission that oversees police. And so not necessarily, I think that person may be busier, there might be more hours, but there's not a significant, there's already a contracted individual doing that. Now, they will do more powerful investigations, might take more time, might take more effort. And so I think there is a good chance that it could run more expensive, but there is an existing commission. This basically replaces it with one that has more power, but has the same sort of.
It's pretty neutral, you think?
It'll cost a little bit more, I'm sure, as they get deeper into more investigative stuff. They, if a officer gets subpoenaed and for some reason, resists that could be a fight that might cost some money, but I don't think it'll be significant in the city's budget.
And someone wanted just a reminder of when can we expect our ballot in the mail?
Probably at the beginning of October, end of September. They'll be coming. And then you can turn it into one of those places or send it right back in.
So just to finish up, if you would just remind everybody what PolitiFest is and how you feel like it will help people, because we obviously couldn't answer everybody's questions today. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to share more about what PolitiFest is and how it'll help prepare everybody for the November election.
Well, first of all, thank you so much again. And I'm sorry I raced through so many. I wanted to make sure I got through the 20 minutes. So thank you to the Jewish Community Foundation, Beth and Mark at the San Diego Foundation. I really appreciate this time. So the PolitiFest is politifest.org. So POLITIFEST.org, politifest.org. You can see our preliminary lineup right now. All of the debates we'll have every night from Tuesday night through Saturday. Debates and discussions. So there'll be a mayoral debate, for instance, on Friday. We'll have the 2 congressional fights. So the Georgette Gomez versus Sarah Jacobs. We'll have that debate. We'll also have a debate about Darrell Issa and Amar Kemp-Najjar. That should be fascinating. The East County supervisors will debate, Steve Voss and Joel Anderson. So those are each night. There will be a different sort of menu. We've tried to group them by themes and tried to make it sure if you care about something, you probably wouldn't care about one that's happening at the same time. Like the Encinitas mayor's race might not be interested to you if you're interested in the San Diego mayor's race. So we've tried to bunch it so that it doesn't conflict. You can go to, again, voiceofsandiego.org/politifest or politifest.org will redirect you. And, there's, we try to give free tickets to some lower income individuals, but also students. But mostly, we try to make sure it pays for itself. We've got a lot of volunteers and a lot of people pulling it together. I think there'll be like 30 different online forums kind of like this with debates. So we're trying to handle this new world. We used to just have one day at the University of San Diego, and this will be bigger and more diverse than anything we've ever done.
Awesome. Well, I encourage everybody to attend. I know I'll be there for some of it, for the things that are pertinent, obviously, to me. So thank you very much, Scott. And as I said at the beginning, the San Diego Foundation and the Jewish Community Foundation are committed to building a better San Diego for as many people as we possibly can. And having an informed citizenry where we can make our choices is really critical. And just a final note, some of you may be unfamiliar, but the Jewish Community Foundation, while a Jewish community foundation that operates from Jewish values, a good 3/4 of our grants go to secular causes. And so, we really do join the San Diego Foundation in wanting to see the most vibrant and healthy San Diego that we can. And I look forward, I want to thank Mark for joining us and for his wonderful introduction to me. I was very complimented. Thank you so much. I return the sentiment completely and look forward to our further collaborations. Thank you all so much and have a great afternoon.